I became really fascinated with this, with the internet. And I was especially fascinated with the new types of organizational structures that were possible, the ways that sort of the internet had been transforming all of these industrial types of systems, all these businesses, whether it's newspapers or media. And I was interested in how it was going to transform other things. I saw sort of the peer-to-peer organizational structure of Wikipedia. I saw the way the open source movement allowed so many individuals to participate in very small ways to make massive, massive things that had only ever been possible before with really centralized authority. And I thought, how could that change things in the real world? Because when we look around, we face really, really substantial problems right now. Often because technology has changed the way we live, but I was interested in how we could sort of intelligently think about how we would approach those problems, whether that's climate change, terrorism, sort of the changes in family units that we've seen over the last 30 years. And so I started to think about things from a certain perspective. I started to think about the industrial way of doing things, the idea of sort of top-down control, where we were often cogs in a machine, versus this new sort of network potential of peer-to-peer systems, ways that many people could have agency, many people could create, and all together make something much larger. And I started to think especially how that could work in the real world. And at the same time, this was 2008, so there was an incredible sort of cultural force that was especially being felt on college campuses. And this was obviously the Obama movement. And I call it a movement because it was actually about much more than a single candidate or a single person. It was really this, to me, it was a very powerful thing because I saw all these people coming together who really believed that we could make substantial fundamental change in the world. And what was less inspiring than the person was the crowd and the way that the people who were organizers, organizers like myself, could use the internet and could bring together their peers, bring together their neighbors, bring together all sorts of people that they'd never met to try to think about how they could accomplish a single mission. And I was very hopeful that could happen in a way that was much more than about just getting one person elected, but that we could find sort of smart ways to approach problems from different ways. So in 2008, I actually stopped what I was doing. I moved down south to help open a voter registration office in Virginia. It was afterwards, when I came back to Massachusetts, that I got a little bit less partisan and focused on the campaign that decriminalized marijuana in Massachusetts, which we did pass. But in both situations, I realized that this sort of fundamental truth, which is that I feel like it is a core human desire to want to be a part of something larger than ourselves. It is a fundamental part of being human that we want something to last longer than our time here on Earth, and we want to do it with other people. And I started thinking about, the text changed a little bit, but this idea that, it's not my idea, it's an idea that's sort of been core to anthropology for a while, which is that belief and the beliefs you hold about the world don't just shape your action, and your actions don't just shape your beliefs. There's actually this three-way sort of interaction where the beliefs you hold and the actions that you take form a really crucial part of your identity. And your identity is not just you, it's the people who you consider to be like you. Whether your community is other creative problem solvers, whether your community is entrepreneurs, whether your community is technologists or Democrats or Republicans or Christians or Buddhists or Hindus, your community actually has a huge amount of influence on the beliefs you then choose to hold afterwards, after you've made that association with a group, and the actions you take afterwards. So you choose your community partially because of the beliefs and actions you have before, but then your community shapes you. So, but what's especially important today is because we have so much incredible choice, especially when you look at the internet, that we have a new ability to pick our tribes. We have a new ability to seek out and find other folks that are like us. And that is incredibly powerful and incredibly meaningful for our experience as people, but it's also a little bit dangerous. So this doesn't just apply for whether you are on the left or you're on the right or you're libertarian or statist. It's every sort of group. We want to come together to accomplish incredible things. And we can accomplish incredible things. But the danger, right, is that we become more extreme and we become blind to the ideas of others. So that's sort of the framework that I had in 2008 after spending a bit of time as an organizer. And I also found, as I looked into things, some really interesting statistics that I want to share with you guys a little bit, just about the broad political landscape in the United States, and then I'll dive into some other things. But so this is a map of actually the political geography of the United States in the 1976 election. The white areas you see are areas where there were competitive districts. So what that means is there were somewhat of an equal amount of Republicans and Democrats who lived in a very small area together. In 1976, the South was largely Democratic. You can see the gray areas are the Republican counties. But over the next 30 years, we've experienced an incredible amount of social mobility. People move to places, and they have a new sort of freedom to move to places that really just they can identify with, move to places with people that are like them. So by 2004, you saw that people who tended to vote liberal, tended to have a liberal worldview, had moved into larger cities, and people who had more of a conservative worldview tended to move to ex-urban areas or rural areas. And so we've actually, although people like to say that we don't have red states and blue states, it is actually a reality that we tend to live in environments with people who are really like ourselves. And this goes down to the whole idea of the creative class and the creative economy and the creative corridor too, because it gets even more specific when you think about industry and people wanting to live around folks like them. And this has caused a ton of stress to our political system, because if you think about our national leaders are really only accountable to the people in their district, and they don't actually have to worry about the people in their district wanting to see a more balanced solution. They tend to have their greatest threats coming from other folks within their party. That's one of the reasons that you can see the Tea Party had a lot of success. People are worried about being primaried, basically. And so this is a representation of voting patterns in the Senate. There isn't a ton of across the aisle collaboration. And so what that has produced at the national level has been a ton of gridlock. At the same time, at the state and local level, you do see a certain amount of innovation. You do see people trying to change their state policy to create a world that is more like the world that they believe in. So when we saw these things back in 2008, and I sort of felt like this was going to become even more significant, I wanted to take some sort of leap into that world. I wanted to see, is there a way that we could apply this peer-to-peer collaboration? Is there a way we could apply this new kind of internet infrastructure to create a more responsive system, to create a type of political mobilization that could really deal with these complex challenges that we don't even understand? Mr. Hunter was talking about that the danger is, his students don't understand the problems that we're facing, but the truth is we don't even understand the problems we'll be facing in 10 years either. I don't know how many people here would have really predicted that, we would have this much computing power, which is about 1 billion times cheaper and 1,000 times smaller than the computers that were in MIT in the 70s that took up entire rooms bigger than this room. And that's going to be happening at a greater and greater pace. So when I had this sort of way of seeing this world and this problem worth focusing on, it kind of created to me a sort of an ideology. And I think ideology is really important. It's a dirty word, but it's basically the set of beliefs about how things should be and an idea about how to get them there. And I think it's important for everyone to know what their own ideology is, to know where they are trying to bring their life and the lives of people around them, and to know how they think about getting there. But also, ideology is really not enough. A mentor of mine once gave me this advice, that entrepreneurship can be defined as the always painful and occasionally rewarding process of reconciling your vision with reality. Things are almost never like we think they are at first. So what I wanted to try to do was to basically start at the smallest level possible, get something out the door, and really interact with real people. And the truth is we had to be minimalist by design. This was the landing page for Localocracy at the end, pretty much. But what we started with was I was part of this incredible network of mentors that was the UMass Entrepreneurship Initiative, and competed in business plan competitions trying to get just a little bit of funding and a little bit of credibility so I could convince some engineers that it was worth working with me. And I actually had to compete in 4 business plan competitions before we won anything. But we started with $10,000 that we won. And afterwards, that was enough to convince one incredible programmer and a design firm that they should work with me, and they should work pro bono until we had enough money to pay, and start with our very initial product. And so we actually started with one town. So what we created was a platform to take the best ideas of a community, confirm that people actually live there, and give them tools to say, here are the pros and cons of any of these local issues, whether these issues are, should these 2 school districts be merged together? Should we build a solar farm in the abandoned landfill? Should we allow people to keep chicken coops in their yard? These were the sort of issues that citizens raised, and these were the sort of issues that they discussed on our platform. And from there, we started working on how could we take that very local infrastructure. When we launched, I think I probably met with every person in town meeting, every person in government to get them to support it, and figured out how we could scale that to other cities. And so this was an early screenshot, things like the Youth Commission and the Public Library. And so what we eventually did is, as we started to grow, we grew into other towns, and we actually found that our right space wasn't a space that we had anticipated. The space that we'd always thought was that we would work with governments, and the governments would really be open to the idea of having a much more responsive civic ecosystem. But actually what we found was there was another group that was much more interested in working with us, and that was news organizations. News organizations that had the whole economic system they designed around local advertising was falling underneath their feet. They needed a way that they could provide their normal civil service and really get that in-depth local coverage and get it at scale, and they needed some sort of technological solution for that. So we started working with newspapers. As we grew into other towns, we started working with organizations like the Boston Globe and a lot of small regional papers, basically helping them create communities for sourcing user-generated content. And what ended up happening was actually a business development deal that turned into a much bigger business development deal than we thought. When we approached AOL to try to work with their network of 1,000 local papers, we ended up being acquired by AOL and moving into the Huffington Post to try to take the same idea of crowdsourcing content, creating a new type of public sphere, but applying it on a much larger stage than we had had before. So I now lead the Huffington Post Media Group's Labs initiative, which is basically trying to inform, engage, entertain, and educate individuals, and convert the audience that we have into an efficient public sphere to try to tackle these larger problems. So I'm going to talk really quickly about the approach that we have towards things, and leave you guys with some questions. Our approach may be different than the approach that is normal for the Creative Problem Solving Institute. We really believe in MVPs, which are minimum viable products. We built with our startup and also with the products that we do now, we tried to build the very smallest thing possible to test an idea and then iterate on that as quickly as we possibly could. So what is the core hypothesis is what I would ask you guys for the problem that you want to solve whenever you want to get into a new space. What is the core hypothesis you want to test, and what is the least you can do to evaluate that? The other thing we look for is crossover. What's the best idea that hasn't been applied in your industry yet? What is something that you can transfer? Maybe it's a concept that has worked in manufacturing, has never been applied to education, right? Or a concept from education has never been applied to life sciences. And then the other thing that I think is important just for your emotional fulfillment is, what is the problem that you and the people you really identify with really care the most about? A lot of times folks talk about product market fit in the entrepreneurial space, but I think what's just as important is founder market fit and finding the right area that you want to find the problems to solve. So these are some of the ideas that we've put out. We put out a debate platform where we would get great bloggers like or public officials to take on a topic, and we try to ease people's way of, sort of open people's mind before they read any of the arguments and show them their own bias and influence. So one example, we had Mayor Bloomberg and a Republican commentator actually debate on the stand your ground laws that became a really influential topic that people were talking about after the Trayvon Martin shooting. And so users would vote, they would then see the arguments, they'd vote again, and we would actually be able to measure what individual had had more influence on those folks. And hopefully let people open their mind to think in a different way about these problems before they really made up their mind. Another example, we took a concept that is sort of pretty well known in the folks who use the Kindle. When you see various things getting highlighted, you can see what other people have highlighted. That hadn't really been applied to the news space, so this is actually the problem we're working on right now. And our minimum viable product was just seeing what people have been copying and pasting out and seeing whether any of those were meaningful quotes. And we're actually developing the UI for that so people will interact with that now. So that's a little sneak peek. But really the things I want to leave you guys with are know the tribe that you belong to. Keep your mind open that there are other tribes as well. But when you want to create things and really engage people, speak to their core values. Speak to the things that matter most to them. A lot of times those are values around justice. Those are values around equality and harm and care, or values of freedom. But the other thing I want to bring up is that execution is everything. This is a friend told me this was a quote that I'd given him that he thought I would bring up. One of my early mentors too, when we were starting out, told me that my idea was worth close to nothing, right? That because really ideas are just multipliers. If you take an awful idea or a so-so idea or a good idea, it really doesn't matter until you put things behind it. You take your idea value and you multiply it by the amount of execution you can deliver. So the key there is that your best idea is worth $20 until you go out and start doing something with it. So find a problem worth solving and start. But the other thing I want to leave, I'm going to leave 10 minutes to sort of actually start a kind of a conversation and open things up for questions if you've got any, is I think we have some really substantial problems that are on the horizon. I spend a lot of time engaged with the sort of futurist community, that I spend a lot of time in technology. And I think there are some problems that people don't really think that much about. And here's just one that's worth thinking about. So I have an uncle and two cousins who spent most of their career as truck drivers. This is just a different way of thinking about something you may already know. And recently, there's a lot of hype, because it's going to be coming out soon, about the self-driving car. And the self-driving car is going to be a really magnificent thing. But I think what it's going to also do is it's also going to, the self-driving car isn't quite as significant when you think about the global economy as the self-driving truck, and that we're going to have a lot of automated transportation. And so the question that I want to leave to you guys is, as we have these technological advancements, as we have certain individuals able to reach a disproportionate number of people, certain amount of innovation to continually disrupt, and this disruptive innovation constantly happening, what happens to the majority of people who maybe can't keep up with that constant reinvention that seems to be the trend these days? Because my fear right now, we spend a lot of time thinking about what are the big national problems, what are ways we can engage people in those problems, is the fear that the recession is actually just at the beginning. Maybe we'll come back a little bit, maybe we'll come back for quite some years, but I'm worried about what's going to happen when a lot of people find their occupation has not just been outsourced, but automated. And so that's the question that I would really like to leave you guys with, and a problem that I think is really worth focusing on. So thank you very much.